Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku trained under Saitama to surpass all limits? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had lost its color. That was the first thing Izuku Midoriya noticed as he stumbled away from the rooftop, his feet moving on an autopilot born of 14 years of habit. The vibrant hues of Mizurufu, the cheerful blues of the sky, the proud reds of hero billboards, it had all bled out into a uniform, soul-crushing gray. All Might's words, spoken with the pained finality of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis, echoed in the hollow space where his dreams used to be. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic, kid, realistic. Izuku's hand tightened on the strap of his yellow backpack, the worn fabric a familiar comfort that did nothing to soothe the gaping wound in his chest. His notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, felt like a lead weight inside, each page a testament to a life spent chasing an impossibility. He had filled it with detailed observations, tactical breakdowns, and heartfelt admiration. Now, it was just a diary of a fool. He had asked the question he'd been terrified to ask his entire life, and the number one hero, the symbol of peace, his idol, had given him the answer he always knew, deep down, was the truth. Can I be a hero without a quirk? No. The word was a physical blow. It was the culmination of every jeering laugh from his classmates, every pitying look from his teachers, every one of Kaken's explosive insults. Useless Deku. He'd always tried to fight against the label, to prove that his spirit, his mind, his heart, could make up for the genetic lottery he had lost. But if All Might himself said it was impossible, then it was. The game was over. The final whistle had blown. An explosion rocked the street a few blocks ahead, sending a tremor through the pavement under his worn red sneakers. A plume of black smoke billowed into the sky. Normally Izuku would have been sprinting towards the chaos, notebook already in hand, his mind buzzing with analytical fervor. It was an instinct as natural to him as breathing, but today, his feet felt bolted to the ground. What's the point? He thought, the voice in his head a venomous whisper. Go watch the real heroes work. Go take notes you'll never use. Go stand on the sidelines like always. Be realistic. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and started walking the long way home, away from the sirens, away from the shouting, away from the world he so desperately wanted to be a part of. Each step was a surrender. With each meter he put between himself and the incident, he felt a piece of himself crumbling away into dust. But then, he heard it. A frantic shout from the crowd that had gathered. He's got a hostage! A kid from the local middle school! The words snagged on something deep inside him, a stubborn, foolish root of heroism that refused to be poisoned by despair. A kid. He stopped. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. He remembered the villain from earlier. The cloying, putrid sludge villain that All Might had captured. The one that had slipped from the hero's pocket because Izuku had foolishly grabbed onto his leg. A cold, horrifying realization washed over him. He hadn't just been a distraction. He had been the cause. The villain was free because of him. Someone was in danger because of him. The guilt was a physical force, stronger than his despair. It turned him around and propelled his legs forward, carrying him back towards the smoke and fire. He pushed through the gawking crowd, his breath catching in his throat, and broke through to the front. And then he saw it. The narrow alleyway was a chaotic mess of fire and debris. The pro-heroes, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, were all there, but they were helpless. The sludge villain was larger now, a grotesque, writhing mass of green ooze, fueled by the explosions erupting from within him. And trapped in that suffocating prison was a familiar figure, a boy with spiky ash-blonde hair and furious red eyes. Katsuki Bakugo. Kaken. Izuku's world tilted on its axis. He saw the struggle, the raw, desperate fight for air. He saw the explosions, not controlled and arrogant, but wild and panicked. And for the first time in his entire life, Izuku saw something in Bakugo's eyes that he had never witnessed before, pure, unadulterated terror. He was drowning. He was suffocating. He was looking for a hero, and the heroes were just standing there. His quirk is all about explosions. He's a terrible matchup for Kamui. Death arms can't get a grip on that sludge. I need a clear shot. They were waiting. Waiting for someone with the right quirk, the right power. They were being realistic. Izuku wasn't. He didn't know when his legs started moving. He didn't make a conscious decision. One moment he was frozen behind the police line, a useless spectator, and the next, he was sprinting past them, a blur of green and black against the fiery backdrop. Hey! Kid! Stop! It's too dangerous! The shouts were distant noise. The world had narrowed to a single, desperate objective: save him. His mind, the analytical engine that had been his only weapon, went into overdrive. Eyes. It has solid eyes. And teeth. Those are weak points. How do I get there? How do I create an opening? His yellow backpack. It was all he had. With a primal scream that tore from his throat, a sound raw with guilt and fear and a desperate, defiant flicker of hope, he swung the bag off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. It sailed through the air and struck the villain squarely in one of its large, bulbous eyes. The creature roared in pain and surprise, its grip momentarily loosening. It was a tiny window, a second of opportunity. It was enough. Izuku was already there, his fingers clawing at the semi-solid sludge, trying to dig Bakugo out. The muck was thick and foul-smelling, sucking at his hands, but he didn't stop. Kaken! He screamed, his voice cracking. Bakugo's eyes snapped open, widening in shocked disbelief. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? I don't know. Izuku sobbed, his face a mess of tears and snot. My legs, they just started moving. You looked like you were asking for help. For a single, fleeting second, the fury in Bakugo's eyes faded, replaced by something unreadable. But the moment was gone as quickly as it came. The sludge villain recovered, its rage now focused entirely on the quirkless gnat trying to steal its prize. A massive, slimy tendril rose up, forming a monstrous fist, and arced down towards Izuku. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Izuku looked up at the descending blow, his mind strangely calm. He was going to die. He had accomplished nothing. He was a fool. But as he looked at Bakugo, who now had a precious second to gasp for air, he found he couldn't regret it. He had acted like a hero, even for just a few seconds. He braced for the impact, a silent apology to his mother on his lips. But the impact never came. There was no Texas smash. No booming voice declaring, I am here. Instead, the world tore. It started as a sound, a high-pitched whine like 1,000 pieces of crystal shattering at once, layered over a deep, guttural grinding like tectonic plates shifting. A shimmering distortion, like a heat haze on a summer road, appeared directly in front of the villain's descending fist. It was no bigger than a dinner plate, but it radiated an energy that made the air hum and the fillings in Izuku's teeth ache. The villain's slimy appendage touched the distortion and simply vanished. Not pushed back, not disintegrated. It was just gone, as if it had never existed. The villain recoiled, confused. The shimmering tear in reality pulsed, a violent shade of violet and silver, and then it expanded with a deafening roar. It wasn't a portal, not a clean circle or oval. It was a jagged, angry wound in the fabric of space-time, and it was pulling. The wind whipped around them, a furious vortex with the tear at its center. Debris, fire, and sludge were all sucked into the void. The pro-heroes were thrown back. Bakugo was ripped free from the villain's grasp, sent tumbling across the pavement. Izuku, standing closest to the phenomenon, felt the pull most acutely. It was an irresistible, physical force, latching onto him, dragging him from the world he knew. He clawed at the ground, his fingers scraping against the asphalt, but it was no use. He felt his body lift, his feet leaving the ground. He caught a final, fleeting glimpse of Bakugo's terrified face, of All Might in his skeletal form finally arriving on the scene, his expression one of utter shock. Then, the world became a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and screaming sound. He felt the sensation of being stretched and compressed simultaneously, of his very atoms being unwound and respun. It was an agony beyond comprehension. And then, as suddenly as it began, there was only darkness. Pain was the first sign of his return to consciousness. A dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from every cell in his body. The second was the taste of dust and iron in his mouth. The third was the smell of burnt asphalt, and something vaguely metallic, like old blood. Izuku groaned, pushing himself up onto his elbows. His school uniform was torn and filthy, and a nasty scrape on his cheek was bleeding sluggishly. He blinked, his vision swimming back into focus. He was in a crater, not a small one, but a massive, bowl-shaped depression in what looked like a 4-lane street. The asphalt was cracked and blackened. Around him, the city was in ruins. Buildings were sliced in half with an unnatural, surgical precision. Others looked like they had been melted, their steel skeletons warped and twisted into grotesque shapes. A skyscraper in the distance was missing its entire top half, a clean, horizontal cut as if a giant had swiped it away with a butter knife. There were no people. No cars. No sounds of life. Only the low whistle of the wind blowing through the skeletal remains of a metropolis. Where am I? He whispered, his voice hoarse. Is this the afterlife? Panic began to bubble in his chest, cold and sharp. He scrambled to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He looked down at his hands. They were scraped and bruised, but they were his. He was alive. But where? Was this the result of some villain's quirk? Had he been teleported? His muttering started, a frantic, reflexive coping mechanism. Okay, think. Last thing I remember was the sludge villain. Kaken, then a hole? It wasn't a warp gate. Kurogyres is black and misty. This was different. It was bright and loud. The physics felt wrong. Am I in a different city? A different country? The architecture is modern but desolate. The destruction is too widespread and too clean for a normal villain fight. A skittering sound cut through his rambling. It was close. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. He slowly turned towards the sound. From behind the husk of a burnout bus, something emerged. It was monstrous. It stood on 6, multi-jointed insectoid legs, each tipped with a razor-sharp talon that clicked menacingly on the broken pavement. Its body was covered in a thick, iridescent green and purple chitinous armor, like a gigantic beetle. Its head was a nightmare of clicking mandibles, drooling a viscous, acidic saliva that sizzled when it hit the ground. And its face was a cluster of dozens of unblinking, ruby-red compound eyes, all of which swiveled to fixate on him. Oh, what's this? A voice hissed. It was a chittering, wet sound that seemed to come from the monster itself. A little morsel, delivered right to my doorstep. Izuku's mind went blank with terror. Villain? No, this was something else. This was a monster. It radiated a palpable aura of malice and bloodlust that no villain he had ever seen could match. The creature took a step forward, its bulk shaking the ground. I was drawn by the delicious energy signature. A tear between worlds. And you popped right out of it, smelling of fear and weakness. You will be a delightful appetizer, little human. It was going to kill him. It was going to eat him. He was alone, quirkless, in a dead city with a creature from a nightmare. All Might wasn't here. No heroes were coming. This was it. This was the realistic end to his foolish dream. His legs, which had moved so bravely just minutes, or was it hours, ago, were now locked in place by primal fear. He couldn't run. He couldn't fight. He could only stand there, trembling, as the monster, the Scuttler Fiend as it would later be designated by the Hero Association, raised a scythe-like foreleg to strike him down. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. I'm sorry, Mom. FWP. It was a small sound. A casual, almost comical noise, like a towel being snapped in a locker room. He waited for the searing pain. It didn't come. He heard a wet, explosive splat, followed by a rain of warm, goopy liquid. Hesitantly, he opened one eye. The monster was gone. In its place was a shower of green and purple gore, splattering across the crater and sizzling on the hot asphalt. And standing right where the creature's head had been was a man. He was plain. Unbelievably, impossibly plain. He was of average height and build, dressed in a bright yellow jumpsuit with a simple white cape, red gloves, and a red belt. But the most striking feature was his head. It was perfectly, completely bald, polished to a soft sheen under the gray sky. His face was a simple, almost cartoonish drawing of placid indifference. A single drop of purple monster blood was sliding down his shiny dome. He looked down at his red-gloved fist, then up at the raining viscera, a look of mild annoyance on his face. TCH. Right on the cape. Izuku could only stare, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The terrifying, city-destroying monster that was about to kill him had been obliterated. It hadn't been a fight. It hadn't even been a struggle. It was an extermination, as casual as swatting a fly. The bald man finally seemed to notice him. His blank expression shifted to one of mild curiosity. Oh. Hey. You okay, kid? Izuku's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He pointed a trembling finger at the spot where the monster had been, then at the man. You just… Yeah, I punched it, the man said with a shrug, wiping the gore from his head with the back of his glove. It was making a lot of noise. Kinda disruptive. He looked Izuku up and down, taking in his torn school uniform and the utter terror on his face. You're not from around here, are you? New guy? The dam of Izuku's composure finally broke. He fell to his knees, a torrent of babbling, half-coherent words pouring out of him. Why your quirk? What was that? The speed, the power. It was instantaneous. I didn't even see you move. It was stronger than All Might. Are you a new pro hero? I've never seen you before. Your costume is simple, but effective for visibility. The power output required to atomize a creature of that size with a single blow without any visible energy signature or physical recoil is theoretically impossible. Was it kinetic force amplification? A spatial distortion punch? A vibration-based attack that… Whoa, slow down, the man said, holding up a hand. He looked genuinely confused. Quirk? What's a quirk? Izuku stopped, his frantic muttering screeching to a halt. What? Yeah, I don't know what that is, the man repeated, scratching his bald head. I'm just a hero for fun. A hero for fun? The phrase didn't compute. In Izuku's world, being a hero was the most important job, a pillar of society. It was fame, fortune, and responsibility. It was a licensed, government-regulated profession. It wasn't a hobby. I don't understand, Izuku stammered, his mind reeling. The man sighed, a long-suffering sound of someone forced into a tedious conversation. Look, kid. I'm Saitama. I'm a hero. I punch monsters. That's pretty much it. Now, what's your deal? You just sort of fell out of the sky. This was his chance. This strange, impossibly powerful man was his only lifeline in this terrifying new world. Through his tears, through the confusion and the fear, Izuku Midoriya did the only thing he knew how to do. He told his story. He poured it all out. The dream he'd had since he was 4, the day he was diagnosed quirkless, the years of bullying from Kaken, the unwavering belief that he could still be a hero. He told him about the sludge villain, about his moment of foolish bravery. And he told him about All Might, about looking his idol in the eye and being told to give up, to be realistic. The words came out in a torrent of pain and desperation. The full weight of his 14 years of suffering laid bare in a dusty crater in an alien city. And he told me I couldn't do it. Izuku finished, his voice a broken whisper, tears streaming freely down his face. The number one hero told me to give up. That someone like me, a quirkless, useless Deku, could never be a hero. And I think he was right. He finally looked up at the bald man, expecting to see pity, or maybe just the same bored indifference. But he saw something else. It was faint, just a flicker in those simple, placid eyes, but it was there. A glint of recognition. A ghost of a memory. Saitama was quiet for a long time, looking at the crying boy in the tattered school uniform. He wasn't really feeling empathy. Feelings like that had become dull and distant for him, drowned out by the overwhelming silence of his absolute power. But he was remembering. He remembered a younger version of himself, a jobless salaryman with a weak chin and dead eyes, getting rejected from another interview. He remembered the feeling of being useless, of having no purpose. And he remembered the day he saw a monster, one with a chin like a butt, and a kid who'd drawn nipples on him with a permanent marker. He remembered his own body moving on its own, saving that kid not for glory or recognition, but just because it felt like the right thing to do. He remembered the fire he'd felt then, the burning desire to be a hero who could send villains flying with a single punch. He looked at Izuku, at his messy green hair, his tear-streaked face, and the ridiculously earnest, desperate fire in his eyes. He saw the same stupid look he used to have. The world was a boring place for Saitama. Victory was a foregone conclusion. Every monster, every threat, every earth-shattering menace, ended the same way, with one punch. There was no thrill, no challenge, no struggle. It was a lonely, anticlimactic existence. But this was different. A kid from another dimension, a world full of quirks and heroes, who had the spirit of a hero but none of the power. A kid who had just been told his dream was impossible by the strongest person he knew. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched Saitama's lips. This could be a hassle. It would probably be a pain in the neck. But it also might be fun. So, Saitama said, his voice cutting through Izuku's despair. You got no powers, you got told you're useless. But you still want to be a hero strong enough to save everyone? Izuku wiped his eyes with a dirty sleeve and nodded, a pathetic, jerky motion. More than anything. Saitama stared at him for another long moment, then let out a sigh that seemed to carry all the boredom in the universe. He turned and started walking out of the crater. Fine, he said over his shoulder. Izuku blinked. Fine? What do you mean, fine? Saitama stopped and looked back, his expression as unreadable as ever. You want to be strong enough to save everyone? Fine. It's a pain, but I'll teach you. The world, which had been a silent, colorless wasteland, suddenly exploded with light and sound in Izuku's mind. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow, more powerful than any punch. Hope, a terrifying, brilliant, and overwhelming force surged through him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees again. This man, this stranger who had just annihilated a monster without trying, was offering him everything. Really? Izuku stammered, scrambling to his feet. You'll train me? But I'm quirkless. I don't have any power. All Might said, I don't care about that stuff. Saitama interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. You've got a good look in your eyes. That's enough to start. He jabbed a thumb at his own chest. I wasn't born like this, you know. I got this strong through training. Izuku's mind raced. A training regimen? A secret technique? A way to gain power without a quirk? This was it. This was the path he'd been searching for his entire life. What is it? He asked, his voice filled with a desperate, trembling reverence. What's the secret to your power? I'll do anything. Anything you ask. Saitama gave him a deadpan look. It's pretty tough. You sure you can handle it? No whining. Yes. Izuku shouted, bowing so low his forehead almost touched the ground. I promise. I won't let you down. Thank you, Sensei. Saitama flinched at the title. Yeah, whatever. Just stop crying. It's weird. He turned and started walking again. I'll tell you about the training tomorrow. For now, there's something more important. Izuku scurried after him, his heart feeling like it was going to burst out of his chest. He was filled with a million questions, a boundless energy. This was the first day of his new life. He was going to become a hero. His mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, of grueling trials and epic struggles that would forge him into a champion of justice. What is it, Sensei? He asked, his eyes shining. Our first mission? Reconnaissance? A preliminary strength test? Saitama stopped at the edge of the crater and pointed towards the least destroyed section of the distant city. Supermarket, he said, his expression completely serious. There's a special sale on cabbage today. We can't be late. The first day of Izuku Midoriya's new life began not with a heroic proclamation or a sacred ritual, but with the smell of old manga and instant noodles. Saitama's apartment was aggressively minimalist, a single room with a futon, a small television perched on a cardboard box, and a low table. It was the sterile, unlived-in space of a man for whom the world held very few attachments. Izuku, having slept on a borrowed cushion that smelled faintly of Saitama's cape, was buzzing with a nervous energy that felt like 1,000 volts coursing through his veins. He had a new notebook, purchased during their trip to the supermarket the day before, already opened to a fresh page titled, Sensei's Secret Training Regimen. Saitama, wearing a hoodie with a pei printed on the chest, took a long, noisy slurp of his miso soup. You ready, kid? Yes, sensei. Izuku shot up, his back ramrod straight. I am ready to accept any trial, to endure any hardship. Please, bestow your wisdom upon me. Saitama blinked slowly, then pointed a chopstick at him. Okay. 100 push-ups. Izuku's pen flew across the page. 100 push-ups. A foundation of upper body strength. 100 sit-ups. Core stability. Essential for power transfer. 100 squats. Leg power. The source of all movement and striking force. And Saitama said, pausing for dramatic effect as he picked up a piece of tofu, a 10-kilometer run. Izuku's pen scratched furiously. Cardiovascular endurance. For prolonged battles. It's so simple, yet so comprehensive. It covers all the primary muscle groups and stamina. He looked up from his notes, his eyes shining with profound understanding. And what else, sensei? What is the secret ingredient? The advanced technique? Meditation? Key manipulation? A special diet? Saitama took another slurp of soup. Nope. That's it, Izuku stared. That's it, yeah. You do that every single day. Every day? Izuku's voice was a squeak. But what about rest days? Muscle recovery? The risk of rhabdomyolysis from overexertion is no days off, Saitama said, his voice flat and final. And no air conditioner in the summer, or heat in the winter. You gotta train your spirit too. He finished his soup with a loud gulp and stood up. Well, good luck. I'm gonna read some manga. And that was it. No further instruction, no demonstration of form, no words of encouragement. The greatest training regimen in history, the secret to godlike power, was delivered with all the ceremony of a grocery list. Izuku, left alone with the soul-crushing simplicity of the task, felt a fresh wave of determination. It was a test. It had to be. A test of his resolve. He wouldn't fail. He failed. Miserably, he dropped to the floor to begin the push-ups. He managed 21, his arms shaking violently, before his muscles gave out and he collapsed onto the tatami mat, his face pressed against the floor. He rested for a minute, then tried again, managing another 8 before collapsing again. It took him nearly an hour of this grueling, humiliating process to reach the 100 mark, his arms feeling like overcooked noodles. The sit-ups were just as bad. His unused abdominal muscles screamed in protest, cramping violently around the 50 mark. He lay on his back, gasping for air, sweat stinging his eyes, and had to force himself through the second half, one agonizing rep at a time. The squats were a special kind of hell. His legs, already tired from years of walking but unprepared for this, turned to jelly. By 70, he was seeing stars. By 90, he was sure he was going to either pass out or be sick. He finished the final squat with a pathetic whimper and fell over sideways. And he still had the run. He stumbled out of the apartment building into the oppressive humidity of Z-City's summer. The 10-kilometer run was an ordeal beyond words. After the first kilometer, his lungs were on fire. After the second, his legs were lead weights. He ran past shattered buildings and empty streets, the desolate landscape a perfect reflection of his own internal misery. He had to stop multiple times, leaning against the ruined wall, vomiting the watery breakfast he'd had earlier. He finished. He didn't know how, but he did, stumbling back to the apartment hours later. He collapsed just inside the doorway, his body a single, throbbing symphony of pain. Every muscle screamed, every joint ached. He felt like he had been hit by a truck, then backed over for good measure. Saitama glanced up from his manga. Oh. You're done. You took a while. Izuku could only manage a low, pathetic groan in response. This, he realized, as darkness crept in at the edges of his vision, was only day 1. The first month was a blur of monotonous, excruciating pain. Every morning, Izuku would wake up with his body feeling like a collection of broken glass held together by frayed wires. He'd force himself through the regimen, his progress measured in millimeters. The number of push-ups he could do in a single set crept up from 21 to 28. The time it took him to run 10 kilometers went from abysmal to slightly less abysmal. His analytical mind, his greatest asset for his entire life, was now his greatest enemy. It screamed at him with logic and reason, "This is inefficient." It would whisper as he struggled through his sit-ups. "You need progressive overload, not just a static, impossible goal. You're tearing muscle without giving it time to rebuild. You're courting catastrophic injury." He tried to bring this up with Saitama one evening as his sensei was meticulously counting coupons. "Sensei," he began, his voice hoarse. "I've been reading about exercise science. Perhaps if we modified the regimen, focusing on different muscle groups on different days, and incorporated proper recovery periods, the results would be more optimal," and Saitama didn't look up. "That sounds boring. Just do it till you feel like you're gonna die. Then do a little more tomorrow." "But my form! I'm not sure if my squat depth is correct, and my push-ups might be putting too much strain on my shoulder joints. Could you perhaps demonstrate?" "Nah," Saitama said, clipping a coupon for 20% off King Crab. "Looks fine from here." It was the most frustrating mentorship imaginable. Saitama offered no technical advice, no spiritual guidance, no rousing speeches. His mentorship consisted entirely of his silent, overwhelming presence. The unspoken statement hung in the air every second of every day: "I did this, and I became this strong. Now it's your turn." The true training, Izuku slowly began to realize, wasn't physical. The push-ups and sit-ups were just the tools. The real workout was happening inside his skull. It was a battle against every instinct that told him to stop, to rest, to be logical. It was the act of silencing the voice of reason and listening only to the primal scream of his own willpower. It was the grind. It was pushing forward when every fiber of his being begged him to quit. The monotony was broken up by Saitama's own bizarre routine. Several times a week, a monster would attack Z-City. An alarm would blare, and Saitama would sigh, pull on his hero costume, and wander off. He'd return minutes later, sometimes with a bag of groceries, the threat already a distant memory. One day, about 3 months in, they were on their way back from the supermarket when a monster appeared. It was a bizarre creature, a humanoid wad of chewing gum called Gummy Gump, who was trapping citizens in sticky pink blobs. It was, by this world's standards, a wolf-level threat, a nuisance at best. Saitama stopped and gestured at the creature with a leek sticking out of his grocery bag. "Your turn." Izuku froze, his blood running cold. "And me?" "But sensei, You wanna be a hero, right? Go be a hero." Izuku, whose body was in its constant state of near failure from the morning's training, looked at the monster, then at his own trembling hands. He was stronger than he was 3 months ago, but he was still just a boy. He had no powers, no technique. All he had was pain and exhaustion, but Saitama's words echoed in his mind. "Go be a hero," he charged. It was a pathetic display. Gummy Gump shot a wad of sticky gum at him, which he barely managed to dodge. He tried to land a punch, but the creature's body was too pliable, absorbing the blow with a squelching sound. It retaliated with a gummy fist that sent him flying into a pile of trash cans. He got up, his side aching. He dodged and weaved, using his small size to his advantage, his analytical mind desperately searching for a weakness. He was outmatched, but he didn't run. He kept getting back up, his uniform getting covered in sticky pink residue. Finally, Gummy Gump got tired of the game and trapped him completely, encasing him in a suffocating blob of gum. As his vision started to dim, he saw Saitama step forward, a look of profound boredom on his face. Splat! The gum and the monster vanished in a fine pink mist. Saitama poked Izuku's cheek. "You lost. If you get beat up, it means you're not strong enough yet. So get stronger." He then proceeded to complain that some of the monster's goo had gotten on the daikon radish. For Izuku, lying on the pavement, gasping for air and covered in slime, it was the most profound lesson he had ever learned. It was brutally simple. There were no shortcuts. There was no secret technique. There was only strength. And he didn't have enough. So the next day, he pushed harder. 6 months after Izuku's arrival, their routine was interrupted by a new variable. It arrived in a blur of blue light and surgical steel, blasting a hole in the roof of Saitama's apartment. A young man with blonde hair, black cybernetic eyes, and sleek metal arms stood amidst the debris, his expression one of deadly seriousness. He knelt before a very surprised Saitama, who was in the middle of trying to decide what to have for lunch. "My name is Genos," the cyborg announced, his voice a crisp monotone. "I witnessed your incredible power. Please, allow me to become your disciple." Izuku, who was in the corner struggling through his sit-ups, just stared. And so, the trio was formed. Genos was everything Saitama wasn't as a mentor. He was meticulous, analytical, and desperate for knowledge. He immediately began documenting Saitama's every move, recording his every utterance, and analyzing his training regimen with a battery of sensors and algorithms. Genos also became a secondary, and far more conventional, mentor to Izuku. He was initially dismissive of the quirkless boy, seeing him as little more than their master's strange pet project. His scanners registered Izuku as a baseline human with elevated cortisol levels and significant micro-tearing in his muscle tissue. Nothing special. That changed when he first sparred with Izuku. It was a month after Genos' arrival. Izuku was now 9 months into the grind. He was leaner, harder. The baby fat was gone, replaced by wiry muscle. The perpetually terrified look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, grim determination. "Master, if I may," Genos said one afternoon, "I wish to gauge the progress of your other disciple. A sparring session would provide valuable data on the efficacy of your methods." Saitama, who was trying to kill a single, persistent mosquito, waved a hand. "Sure, whatever. Just don't break him. He's supposed to do the dishes tonight." They went to a deserted construction site. Genos stood impassively, his arms primed, incineration cannons glowing faintly. "I will not use lethal force. Please demonstrate your full capabilities." Izuku took a deep breath and settled into a clumsy fighting stance he'd copied from a hero magazine. He was terrified. But the fear was different now. It was a cold, familiar companion, not a paralyzing master. The fight was brutally one-sided. Genos moved with impossible speed, his attacks precise and overwhelming. Izuku was immediately on the defensive. But something was different. He could almost keep up. His eyes, honed by months of near-death training, could track Genos' movements. His body, pushed to the breaking point every single day, reacted with an instinctual quickness he'd never known. Genos launched a kick aimed at his head. A year ago, Izuku wouldn't have even seen it coming. Now, he managed to get his arms up, blocking the blow. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up his entire body and threw him back 10 feet, but his bones didn't break. Genos' optical sensors narrowed. Subject's bone density is within normal human parameters, yet he sustained a blow with 4.5 kilonewtons of force with only minor bruising. Anomaly detected. The fight continued. Izuku couldn't land a single hit, but he refused to go down. He was blasted by jets of heat, narrowly dodging the full force. He was pummeled by cybernetic fists, absorbing blows that would have killed a normal person. He was thrown through concrete walls and got back up, bruised and bleeding, but still standing. His willpower, forged in the crucible of the daily regimen, had become a physical attribute. He simply refused to lose consciousness. Finally, Genos ended it, appearing behind Izuku and chopping him cleanly on the back of the neck. Izuku crumpled to the ground, out cold. Later, as Genos compiled his report, he was deeply troubled. "Sensei," he said, showing Saitama a holographic display of data. "Midoriya's performance was illogical. His energy output is that of a normal human. His muscle composition is dense, but within biological norms. Yet, his durability and recovery rate are anomalous. He should have suffered multiple fractures and severe internal hemorrhaging. My analysis suggests his continued survival is a statistical improbability." Saitama glanced at the complex charts and graphs, then at the unconscious Izuku, who he had slung over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. "Huh," he said. "Guess he's just trying real hard." From that day on, Genos treated Izuku with a newfound respect. He began giving him actual advice, pointers on stance, balance, and how to redirect momentum. He taught Izuku how to fight smart, to use his brain as a weapon again, not just as a source of doubt. Their sparring sessions became a regular occurrence, a brutal but effective supplement to Izuku's daily grind. Time stretched on. 18 months. A year and a half in this strange, desolate world. Izuku was no longer the boy who had fallen through the tear in reality. He was 15 now, but looked older. He was lean and corded with muscle, his body a road map of faint scars from monster fights and sparring with Genos. His green eyes, once wide and fearful, now held a deep, unshakable calm. He moved with a quiet efficiency, a conservation of energy born from endless exertion. He could complete the regimen now. It was still hard, still a daily battle that left him exhausted and aching, but it was no longer impossible. He was strong, stronger than any quirkless person had any right to be. He could punch through concrete. He could outrun a car. He was, by the standards of his own world, a superhuman, but he knew it wasn't enough. He hadn't reached the level of Saitama, or even Genos. There was still a wall, a limit he couldn't seem to surpass. He felt like he was on a plateau, pushing against an immovable barrier. The change came on a Tuesday. It was a sweltering summer day, the kind where the air felt like a hot, wet blanket. Izuku was on the last leg of his 10-kilometer run. His lungs burned, his legs were screaming, and the sun was beating down on his head. He felt dizzy, nauseous. The voice of doubt, his old enemy, was whispering again. This is it. This is your limit. You can't go any further. He ignored it. He pushed harder, forcing his legs to move faster, pumping his arms. He remembered Bakugo, trapped in the sludge. He remembered All Might's pitying look. He remembered Saitama's simple, brutal advice, get stronger. And then, something inside him broke. It wasn't a sound he heard with his ears, but with his soul. A deep, resonant crack that echoed through the core of his being. It was the sound of a lock shattering, of a dam bursting, of a chain snapping. For a terrifying second, he felt like his spirit was being torn apart and stitched back together into something new, something limitless. The pain vanished. All of it. The burning in his lungs, the ache in his muscles, the exhaustion in his bones, it was just gone. Replaced by a profound, unnerving silence. He was still running, but he no longer felt the impact of his feet on the pavement. He no longer felt the strain of his own body. It was effortless. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were piloting a machine that was suddenly functioning at a level beyond its specifications. He finished the run in record time, not even breathing heavily. He returned to the apartment and did the push-ups, the sit-ups, the squats. Each movement was fluid, perfect, and utterly without strain. He felt nothing. No burn, no fatigue. Just a simple, mechanical motion. He walked into the bathroom to splash some water on his face and looked in the mirror. He looked the same, sweaty, determined, but as he ran a hand through his damp, green hair, a thick clump of it came away in his fingers. He stared at the hair in his palm, then back at his reflection. He touched his scalp. Another clump came loose. There was no pain, no sensation at all. It was just letting go. He stood there for a long time, watching as more of his signature messy hair fell into the sink, the green strands a stark contrast to the white porcelain. He wasn't scared. He wasn't sad. He felt a strange, hollow sense of finality. It was the price. He had read about it in Genos's notes, a single, cryptic line from one of Saitama's rare, mumbled explanations. I trained so hard I went bald. Genos came home later that evening to find Izuku sitting calmly at the low table, a small pile of green hair swept up beside him. His own hair was now patchy and alarmingly thin. The cyborg's optical sensors whirred as he ran an immediate diagnostic scan. The results made his internal processors lag. The data was impossible. Contradictory. His sensors registered the biosigns of a perfectly normal human male at peak rest. There was no elevated energy signature. No exotic power source. Nothing. And yet, the sheer potential energy his passive threat detectors were picking up was infinite. It was like looking at a cup of regular water and having your instruments tell you it was a star. Midoriya. Genos said, his voice laced with scientific disbelief. What happened to you? Izuku looked up. His eyes were the same, but the quiet determination had been replaced by a vast, tranquil emptiness. He looked at his own hands, clenching them into a fist without a single tremor. He could feel it now. A universe of power, coiled and waiting beneath his skin. An ocean of silent, absolute force. I think, Izuku said, his voice quiet and even. I broke it. Just then, Saitama walked in, holding a plastic bag. They were out of cabbage, but I got a good deal on some bok choy. He paused, looking at Izuku's rapidly balding head. He blinked once. Oh, Saitama said, with a complete lack of surprise. Your hair's falling out. Guess you're getting there. He walked to the kitchen to put the groceries away, leaving Izuku and Genos in the silent apartment. Izuku looked down at his fist again. He had done it. He had gotten the strength he craved. He had surpassed the limits of his own humanity. He had become strong enough to save everyone. But as he sat there, feeling the terrifying, silent hum of infinite power inside him, a new, unsettling question began to form in the back of his mind. In breaking his limits, what else had he broken? The following weeks were a period of unsettling adjustment for Izuku. The grind, the all-consuming pain that had been the metronome of his life for 18 months, was gone. He still performed the regimen every morning, more out of habit than necessity. It felt like stretching, a casual warm-up that did nothing to tire him. The change was most apparent during his spars with Genos. What were once desperate struggles for survival were now exercises in extreme restraint. He would stand perfectly still, and Genos would unleash a furious barrage of attacks. Incineration cannons, rocket-powered punches, machine gun blows. Izuku would either sidestep them with movements so minimal they were almost imperceptible, or simply let them hit. A full power blast from Genos's cannons, a beam of energy that could liquefy steel, would wash over him, leaving him completely unharmed, his simple training sweats not even singed. The only result was a very frustrated cyborg and a growing cloud of dust. This is illogical, Genos would declare, smoke pouring from his arm vents. My sensors indicate your body has no reinforced armor, no energy shielding. You are composed of ordinary human biomass. You should be a carbonized smear. How are you doing this? Izuku would just look at his own hand, a faint, troubled expression on his face. I don't know, Genos. I just am. The boundless power he now possessed was not a fire he could control. It was a state of being. He didn't feel a well of energy to draw from. He was the well. He was the ocean. There was no powering up. There was only deciding how little of his innate, absolute strength to use so he didn't accidentally break whatever he was touching. This terrifying new reality was slowly dawning on him. He hadn't just gotten strong. He had become strength itself. Saitama, for his part, was completely unfazed. Yep. That's what it's like, was his only comment after watching Izuku accidentally punch a clean, perfectly circular hole through a skyscraper 5 miles away while trying to swat a fly. The conversation that changed everything happened on a quiet evening. Genos had been running complex energy scans of Z-City for weeks, a side project he'd started after Izuku's initial, chaotic arrival. Sensei. Midoriya, he announced, approaching the low table where Saitama was reading manga and Izuku was attempting to mend a tear in his training pants with thread that kept snapping. My long-range dimensional frequency scanners have detected a recurring anomaly. A holographic map of the city materialized above the table. A single point on the outskirts was pulsing with a faint, erratic light. It is the same energy signature I detected from Midoriya's point of origin upon my initial analysis. A spatial distortion. It is unstable, fluctuating in intensity, but it appears to be a gateway, a tear between your world and this one. Izuku's needle-threading stopped. His breath hitched. Home. The word echoed in a part of his mind he had walled off, a place filled with the smell of his mother's katsudan, and the sight of All Might posters on his bedroom wall. He had been so consumed by the training, so focused on surviving the daily ordeal, that he hadn't let himself truly consider the possibility of going back. Saitama flipped a page of his manga. Huh. So he can go home. It would seem so, Genos confirmed. However, the gateway is highly volatile. It opens and closes at random intervals. Based on its current decay pattern, the next stable window will occur in approximately 48 hours. It will remain open for no more than 3 minutes. If he misses it. Genos paused, his mechanical eyes grave. There is no guarantee it will ever open again. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of Genos's internal cooling fans. Izuku looked down at his hands that could now shatter mountains. He thought of his mother. The guilt was a sudden, sharp pang. She must be worried sick. She probably thought he was dead. Kidnapped or killed in the sludge villain incident. He had to go back. He looked at Saitama, the bored, bald man who had, in his own strange and detached way, saved him. He had given him the one thing no one else ever would have, a chance. Sensei, Izuku began, his voice thick with emotion. I thank you for everything. Saitama glanced up, a flicker of something almost like interest in his eyes. He closed his manga and set it aside. For the first time, he looked at Izuku not as a strange kid or a chore, but as something else. He saw the patchy, thinning green hair, the calm, empty eyes, and the quiet, terrible strength that now radiated from him. He saw a reflection. You got what you wanted, right? Saitama asked, his voice unexpectedly serious. You're strong now, Izuku nodded slowly. Yes, being a hero isn't about winning, Saitama said, his gaze distant, as if remembering something from a long, long time ago. It's about showing up. People are in trouble, you show up. Doesn't matter if you're scared, or if you're gonna lose, or if it's a pain in the neck. You just do it. He met Izuku's gaze. Now go show up. It was the most profound piece of advice Saitama had ever given him. Simple, direct, and absolute. It cut through all of Izuku's anxieties and fears. It was his purpose. The next 2 days were a quiet farewell. Genos gifted him a small, durable device. A cross-dimensional communicator. The signal will be weak and likely one way from my end to yours, but it may allow me to send text-based data packets if the dimensional barrier is thin. It was a scientist's way of saying, stay in touch. Saitama's farewell was even simpler. As Izuku stood before the shimmering, unstable Terran reality, a sight that once filled him with terror but now just seemed like a doorway, Saitama handed him a plastic grocery bag. Here, he said. You'll probably be hungry when you get there. Inside was a bento box with a perfectly cooked egg, some rice, and a piece of grilled fish. Izuku felt a lump form in his throat. He bowed deeply, a gesture of ultimate respect. Thank you, Sensei. I will never forget what you've taught me. Yeah, whatever. Saitama mumbled, scratching his head. Try not to break your planet. With a final look at the bald hero and the loyal cyborg, Izuku Midoriya took a deep breath and stepped through the portal. The world dissolved into the same chaotic storm of light and sound, but this time, there was no pain. His body, now a vessel of impossible resilience, passed through the dimensional vortex completely unharmed. The transition was jarring. One moment, the desolate, gray ruins of Z-City. The next, the vibrant, noisy streets of Mizurufu. He stumbled out of the tear, which snapped shut behind him with a sound like a thunderclap, into a familiar alleyway. The air was thick with humidity, and the smell of street vendor takoyaki. The sounds of traffic and cheerful crowds washed over him. He was home. He looked at his reflection in a grimy puddle. The change was stark. He was taller, his frame lean and defined beneath his simple black sweats. His face had lost its roundness, replaced by sharper angles, and his hair, his once proud green mane, was a disaster. It was short, patchy, and thinning alarmingly around the crown. He looked less like a 15-year-old boy and more like a young man suffering from a severe stress-related illness. He checked the date on a newspaper in a bin. Only 2 months had passed. 18 months for him, 2 for this world. Genos's theories about temporal distortion between dimensions had been correct. 2 months. It felt like a lifetime ago. The UA entrance exam was in 3 weeks. He felt a sudden, dizzying wave of culture shock. Heroes were everywhere. Billboards advertised hero-branded merchandise. News reports on a nearby storefront TV detailed the latest villain takedown. People walked the streets with casual mutations. A woman with a giraffe neck. A man juggling small balls of fire. Quirks. The foundational rule of his world, a rule he had been living without for a year and a half. He began the walk home, his heart a frantic drum in his chest. What would he say to his mother? How could he possibly explain where he had been? "Hi, Mom, I was accidentally pulled into another dimension and trained by a bald man who is basically a god, and now my hair is falling out, and I can punch a hole in the moon." It sounded insane. As he rounded a corner, lost in thought, a commotion erupted. A low-level purse snatcher with a minor speed quirk was sprinting down the sidewalk, shoving people aside. He had just snatched a bag from an elderly woman, who had stumbled and fallen. The villain was fast, a blur to the average person. To Izuku, he looked like he was moving through molasses. Before anyone could react, a familiar, booming voice echoed from a side street. "Have no fear, citizens!" "Why?" "Because I am here!" From the alley, All Might, in his towering, muscular form, emerged. But he looked slow. Unbelievably slow. Izuku could see the microseconds it took for the hero's muscles to contract, the wind-up before the lunge. The purse snatcher, panicked, threw the bag high into the air as a diversion. All Might moved to intercept the villain, his focus on the primary threat. But the bag, containing the old woman's valuables and medicine, was arcing towards a storm drain. Izuku didn't think. He acted. He took a single, casual step. The world seemed to warp around him for an instant. To any onlookers, it would have been a flicker, a trick of the light. One moment he was standing 10 meters away, the next he was standing beside the old woman, holding the purse, which he had plucked out of the air an inch from the drain. He knelt down, offering the purse back to her. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm and gentle. The woman stared, bewildered, taking the purse. Thank you, young man. Where did you?" By the time All Might had the villain in a one-handed grip, he turned to see the situation already resolved. He saw the young man with the strange, patchy green hair helping the woman to her feet. The boy moved with a quiet confidence, an unnerving stillness. All Might's hero senses, honed over decades of battle, screamed at him. There was something about this boy. A pressure, a weight in the air around him that felt less like a quirk and more like a law of physics. Then, the boy looked up, and All Might's blood ran cold. He recognized those eyes. The wide, green, expressive eyes of the quirkless, suicidal fanboy from the rooftop. The same boy who had charged so foolishly, so heroically, into the fray to save his friend from the sludge villain. The boy who had vanished when that bizarre dimensional rift had opened. Izuku Midoriya. He looked different. The desperation was gone, replaced by a profound calm. He was no longer a trembling leaf, but a mountain. "It's you!" All Might breathed, his voice barely a whisper as he handed the cuffed villain to the arriving police. He deflated into his skeletal form in the ensuing chaos, smoke billowing from his body, and approached Izuku. "Young man," Tashinori Yagi said, his voice strained. "Izuku Midoriya. You're alive?" Izuku nodded. "All Might." There was no awe in his voice. No stammering fanaticism. Just quiet acknowledgement. It was more unnerving to Tashinori than any open hostility could have been. "Where have you been?" Tashinori pressed, pulling him into a quieter side street. "The police listed you as a missing person, presumed deceased in the villain incident." "Your mother." "I was away," Izuku said, the simple words carrying an impossible weight. "It's complicated." Tashinori studied him. The boy's presence was overwhelming. He'd felt powerful quirks before. He'd stood before all for one himself. This was different. This wasn't a power that could be measured or categorized. It was an absolute presence, like gravity or the passage of time. And it wasn't a quirk. He was sure of it. His senses, and the lingering connection to the vestiges of One for All, could detect no quirk factor in the boy at all. He was still, technically, quirkless, and yet, he had seen what Izuku had done at the sludge villain incident. He had seen the heart of a true hero, a heart that moved his body to action when everyone else, including himself, had hesitated. That heroic spirit was the most important qualification of all. Tashinori had spent months searching for a worthy successor, racked with guilt over the boy's disappearance and his own earlier words. Now, here he was. Stronger. Changed. But the spirit, he prayed, was the same. He had to make the offer. Even if the boy didn't need the power, the quirk itself needed his spirit. Young Midoriya, Toshinori began, a trickle of blood dribbling from the corner of his mouth. I have something to tell you. What I told you on that rooftop. I was wrong. You proved me wrong that day. He took a deep breath. You can become a hero. He explained everything then. His injury, his time limit, and the true nature of his quirk. He spoke of one for all, the sacred torch passed down from generation to generation, a crystalline amalgamation of power cultivated for the sole purpose of defeating evil. A quirk that could be transferred. Izuku listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He had already seen power that defied explanation. A quirk that could be passed on wasn't the most shocking thing he'd heard in the last year and a half. And so, young man, Toshinori finished, his voice trembling with conviction. After witnessing your heroic soul, I have deemed you worthy. I want to offer you my power. I want you to be my successor. Izuku was silent for a long moment. A year and a half ago, this moment would have been the single greatest culmination of his life's dream. He would have broken down into a sobbing, grateful mess. Now, he felt a strange sense of detachment. He didn't need the power. He already had more power than he knew what to do with. To accept seemed greedy, but then he thought about what the quirk represented. It wasn't just power. It was a legacy. A history of heroism. A symbol. Saitama was a hero for fun, an unknown force for good. But All Might was a symbol of peace, an idea that inspired millions. To reject this would be to reject that legacy. And his dream was never just about being strong. It was about being a hero like All Might. His answer was calm, but firm. Okay, Toshinori blinked. Okay? Just okay? Yes, Izuku said. I accept. It would be an honor to carry on the legacy of heroes who saved so many. He accepted not out of desperation for power, but out of a mature desire to honor a tradition of heroism. It was an answer so far beyond what Toshinori had expected that he was left momentarily speechless. Excellent! He finally boomed, a bit of his all-might persona returning. He plucked a hair from his head. Now for the transfer method. You must eat this. Izuku looked at the single strand of blonde hair held between Toshinori's fingers. He thought of all the bizarre things he had seen and done. He'd fought a monster made of chewing gum. He'd seen his mentor kill a subterranean king with one punch. Eating a piece of hair, by comparison, was practically normal. He took it without hesitation and swallowed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it began. It was not the explosive, bone-shattering surge of power Toshinori had warned him about. His body, a vessel forged in the crucible of Saitama's regimen and pushed beyond all human limitation, was more than prepared. It was a fortress of flesh and bone, and the sudden influx of One for All's energy was like a river flowing into an ocean. It didn't strain the banks. It was simply subsumed, assimilated into the vast, limitless potential he already possessed. But inside his mind, it was a different story. The world went white. He was no longer in an alley in Muzudafu. He was floating in a vast, ethereal space, filled with swirling gray mist. Before him stood a collection of figures, 8 of them, shimmering like heat haze. They were faint, translucent, but their presence was undeniable. The vestiges. The previous users of One for All. They were usually dormant, sleeping within the core of the quirk, their consciousnesses only stirring in moments of great crisis or evolution. But Izuku's arrival was an event unlike any other. He wasn't a normal vessel. His spirit, his willpower, his very existence had been pushed beyond the realm of normalcy. When OFA entered him, it didn't just find a new home, it slammed into an immovable object. The spiritual shockwave of his soul colliding with the quirk had violently awakened every single one of them. A tall, gaunt man with long white hair, the first user, stepped forward, his spectral form flickering. His eyes were wide with a disbelief that transcended centuries. What is this? I feel the quirk, but the vessel, it is infinite. A woman with spiky black hair and a determined look on her face, Nana Shimura, floated beside him. She looked at Izuku, not with the gentle encouragement she might have offered another successor, but with pure, unadulterated all. His body, it did not break. It accepted the full power without a single tremor. It's not just containing one for all. It's anchoring it. Like a mountain in a storm. Another user, a bald man with goggles on his head, pointed a translucent finger at Izuku. The will. Can you feel it? It's forged. Tempered beyond anything I've ever felt. It is not the burning fire of a new user. It is the cold, dense core of a collapsed star. They all stared at him, their ghostly forms buzzing with confusion and shock. They were the accumulated power and will of generations, the strongest force for good their world had ever known, and they felt like a candle flame next to a supernova. Izuku stared back at them, a strange sense of familiarity washing over him. He had spent 18 months in the presence of a being of absolute power. This, the feeling of being observed by forces beyond normal comprehension, was not new to him. He offered a small, polite bow. Hello? His consciousness projected into the strange space. My name is Izuku Midoriya. It's an honor to meet you. The vestiges simply stared, their collective minds reeling. This boy, the 9th user of One for All, wasn't just a successor. He was an entirely new chapter. He was an anomaly that threatened to rewrite the very definition of their power. Back in the alleyway, Toshinori watched as Izuku stood perfectly still, his eyes glazed over for a mere 10 seconds. Then, the boy blinked, and the focus returned to his eyes. A faint, ethereal green lightning, the signature of One for All, crackled around him for a single, brilliant instant before sinking back into his skin, completely and perfectly controlled. Did it work? Izuku asked, his voice unchanged. Toshinori could only nod, his mouth agape. There was no pain, no explosive discharge, no shattered bones. Just acceptance. Perfect, absolute control from the very first second. Young Midoriya, he stammered, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. What in the world are you? Izuku looked down at his hand, clenching it into a fist. He could feel it now, the quiet hum of the vestiges in the back of his mind, a chorus of voices joining the vast silence of his own power. He had the strength to break the world, and now he had the legacy of its greatest heroes living inside him. He looked up at the skeletal symbol of peace, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time since his return. I'm a hero! The 3 weeks leading up to the UA entrance exam were a whirlwind of surreal domesticity. Izuku's reunion with his mother had been a tearful, messy affair. Inko Midoriya had oscillated between sobbing relief, frantic mothering, and utter confusion. Izuku's explanation, a heavily redacted story about getting lost, suffering from amnesia, and being taken in by a kind but eccentric martial arts master, was flimsy at best, but it was all she had. She fussed over his thinned hair and the new, unnerving calm in his eyes, but she was just so overjoyed to have her son back that she didn't press too hard. For Izuku, the simple act of eating his mother's katsudon was a more profound and grounding experience than any of his recent power awakenings. His training with All Might was equally strange. They met at the now infamous Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a sprawling junkyard of trash and rusted appliances. Toshinori had planned a grueling 10-month regimen to clean the beach, designed to build up a worthy vessel for One for All. Izuku cleaned the entire beach in 45 minutes. He didn't use One for All. He didn't want to risk it, and more importantly, he didn't need to. He simply started at one end, picking up rusted cars, refrigerators, and tangled masses of scrap metal as if they were children's toys. He moved in a quiet, efficient blur, stacking the refuse into neat, towering piles for the city's collection services. He didn't break a sweat. He didn't even breathe heavily. Toshinori Yagi watched, his skeletal frame perched on a clean patch of sand, his mouth hanging open for the entire duration. He had seen power before. He had wielded the pinnacle of it. But this was different. This wasn't the explosive, dynamic force of a quirk. It was the quiet, inexorable force of a law of nature. It was like watching a human-shaped tidal wave. Young Midoriya, he said, after Izuku had finished, his voice a dry croak. Perhaps we can use the rest of this time to focus on control. Control turned out to be a series of increasingly absurd exercises. All Might would ask him to pluck a single leaf from a tree without disturbing any others. Izuku would do so, moving so precisely that not even the air seemed to stir. He was asked to stack a house of cards on a wobbling platform. Izuku built a 10-story pagoda that was perfectly balanced. His favorite was when All Might, in his muscle form, threw a full-power Detroit smash at him. The punch, carrying the force of a small hurricane, landed squarely on Izuku's outstretched palm. Izuku didn't move an inch. The only results were a cratered beach behind him from the displaced air and a very shocked All Might nursing his bruised knuckles. Izuku's control was absolute because his strength wasn't something he activated. It was a constant. He didn't need to learn how to summon it. He needed to learn how to restrain every single iota of it in every single movement, lest he accidentally shatter the sidewalk with a careless step. It was an exercise in continuous, microscopic precision. He could feel one for all inside him, a warm, buzzing energy core distinct from his own silent, infinite power. The vestiges were a constant presence in the back of his mind, a chorus of whispering, awestruck observers. He could draw on their power if he wanted to. A jolt of green lightning would flicker in his eyes, but it felt like adding a bucket of water to an ocean. For now, he left it dormant. His own base strength was more than enough. It was too much. The day of the UA entrance exam arrived. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, filled with the promise of a new beginning. As Izuku stood before the towering gates of UA High, a school that had been a far-off, impossible dream for his entire life, he didn't feel the crushing anxiety or frantic excitement he would have a year and a half ago. He felt a quiet, placid calm. He was here to do a job. He wore a simple tracksuit, his patchy green hair now cut short in an attempt to make it look less alarming. He clutched the strap of his yellow backpack, a new one, but the same color as the old, a small homage to the moment his life had changed. He took a step forward and his foot caught on an uneven paving stone. He stumbled. Or he would have. A gentle, warm sensation enveloped him for a split second, and his forward momentum was arrested. He found himself floating an inch off the ground. "Whoa, are you okay?" A kind, cheerful voice asked. "Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking. But it'd be bad luck to trip right before the exam, right?" Izuku looked over. A girl with a round, friendly face, rosy cheeks, and a brown bob haircut was holding her hand out towards him, her fingertips pressed together. He recognized the quirk immediately. Zero gravity. "I'm all right," Izuku said, placing his foot down as she released her quirk. "Thank you." "No problem," she chirped, her smile bright and genuine. "I'm super nervous. My heart's beating so fast." "Well, good luck in there." She hurried off towards the main building, Ochako Uraraka. Izuku made a mental note. She was kind. He hoped she would pass. The encounter was a small, pleasant reminder of the world he had come back to, a world of good people using their strange powers to help each other. As he walked towards the auditorium, he felt a familiar, aggressive presence behind him. "Out of my way, Deku." Izuku turned to see Katsuki Bakugo. He looked the same, the spiky ash-blonde hair, the perpetual scowl, the arrogant crimson eyes. But the way he looked at Izuku was different. The usual contempt was there, but it was mixed with a deep, simmering confusion and suspicion. Izuku's reappearance 2 months ago, along with his drastically changed physique and demeanor, had clearly shaken the explosive teenager's worldview. "Hello, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice even. "Good luck today." He offered a small, polite nod and then simply walked away, leaving Bakugo standing there, speechless and sputtering. For his entire life, Izuku had either flinched from him or stood up to him with trembling defiance. This calm dismissal, this complete lack of fear or acknowledgement of their old dynamic, it was more infuriating than any insult. It was as if Bakugo didn't even register as a threat to him anymore. The written exam was simple enough. Izuku's analytical mind, no longer clouded by anxiety, worked through the questions with quiet efficiency. The real test, as everyone knew, was the practical. They were gathered in a massive, replica cityscape, one of UA's many training grounds. President Mike stood atop a tower, his voice booming over the loudspeakers, explaining the rules. 3 types of robots, 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers. The goal was to rack up as many villain points as possible. Izuku listened, his eyes scanning the crowd of nervous examinees. They were all activating their quirks, stretching, psyching themselves up. A boy with engines in his calves revved them loudly. A boy with spiky red hair hardened his fists. They were preparing for a battle. Izuku simply did a few light stretches, the kind his mother did in her morning aerobics class. His goal today wasn't to show off. It wasn't even just to pass. Saitama's words echoed in his head. Being a hero is about showing up. Today, his job was to be a hero for these other kids, to ensure no one got hurt in the chaos. His score was a secondary concern, and stay art. Present Mick's voice screamed. Everyone froze for a second, confused by the lack of a countdown. What are you waiting for? The real world doesn't have a countdown. Go! 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 The other examinees surged forward, a chaotic wave of quirks and teenage bravado. Izuku waited a beat, letting the initial stampede pass. Then he moved. He didn't run. He flowed. He moved through the streets like a ghost, a blur in the corner of one's eye. He saw a one-pointer bearing down on a student who could shoot lasers from his navel. Before the student could even fire, Izuku was there. He extended a single finger and tapped the robot on its head. Tink. The sound was barely audible. But a spider web of cracks appeared on the robot's metal chassis, originating from the point of impact. A second later, the entire machine imploded, collapsing in on itself into a neat pile of scrap metal with a quiet whump. No explosion. No flashy display. Just cessation. The naval laser student stared at the pile of junk, then at the empty space where Izuku had been a nanosecond before. What the? Izuku was already a block away. A group of 3 two-pointers had cornered a girl with vine-like hair. Izuku appeared in their midst. He didn't even punch. He walked past them, tapping each one lightly on their primary leg joint as he went. The joint seized and shattered, and the 3 robots toppled over like felled trees, immobilized but largely intact. He had disarmed them, not destroyed them. Minimal force. Maximum efficiency. He racked up points at an astonishing rate, but no one could get a clear look at him. He was a whisper, an urban legend being born in the middle of the exam. Examinees would find themselves in trouble, and suddenly the threat would be neutralized, the robot crumpled into a ball or neatly disassembled, with no clue as to who had done it. His senses, honed by months of dodging Genos's attacks and sensing monsters from miles away, were on a completely different level. He could feel the vibrations of every robot in the sector, perceive the trajectories of every quirk being fired, hear the panicked heartbeats of every student. He moved through the battlefield like a surgeon, making precise incisions to solve problems before they could escalate. He saw the kind girl from the entrance, Uraraka, in action. She was slapping robots, making them float helplessly into the air, then releasing them to crash back to the ground. A clever application of her quirk. She was doing well. He made a mental note to discreetly disable a few robots in her vicinity to give her more opportunities. In the UE observation room, a panel of screens displayed the action from hundreds of different camera angles. The mood among the pro-hero faculty was one of growing bewilderment. Who is this kid? Snipe asked, pointing a long finger at a screen that showed a 3-pointer robot suddenly folding in half as if it were made of wet cardboard. We can't get a good shot of him. He's just a green blur. His point count is astronomical, Midnight noted, looking at the scoreboard. Izuku Midoriya. Registered as quirkless. That can't be right. Aizawa Shota, also known as Eraserhead, leaned forward, his tired eyes narrowed. It's not a quirk. Or if it is, it's not one I recognize. Look at his movements. There's no tell. No energy build-up, no physical transformation. He's not activating anything. He's just moving. It's like a high-speed teleporter with a disintegration quirk, but without any of the flashy side effects. Nizu, the principal, a small, white-furred creature of indeterminate species, watched with a serene smile, his paws steepled before him. He is not solving the test, is he? He is deconstructing it. All Might stood in the back, sweating profusely in his skeletal form. He knew. He knew this wasn't one for all. This was the terrifying, quiet power he'd witnessed on the beach. He had begged young Midoriya to be careful, to not stand out too much. This, apparently, was the boy's definition of subtle. Time is almost up. Present Mick's voice boomed over the city. Just then, the ground began to shake. A colossal shadow fell over the entire training ground. From behind a block of buildings, a titan of metal and wiring emerged, its sheer scale dwarfing the skyscrapers around it. The zero-pointer. The gimmick. The obstacle designed to be avoided. It was a monstrosity, at least 20 stories high, with massive tank treads and arms the size of city buses. Its single, glowing red eye scanned the battlefield. Panic erupted. It's the zero-pointer. Run! We can't fight that thing. It's worth 0 points. Examinees who had been fighting with bravado just moments before were now scrambling, their faces pale with terror. It was a perfect simulation of a true catastrophe-level threat, overwhelming, terrifying, and seemingly unbeatable. Izuku watched the chaos calmly. It was big. But he'd seen bigger. Saitama had fought a monster the size of a city. This was just a toy. He was about to turn and leave, his work done, when he heard a small, pained cry. His head snapped in the direction of the sound. It was her. Ochako Uraraka. She had pushed another student out of the way of some falling debris from the zero-pointer's rampage, but had gotten her own leg pinned under a large slab of concrete. She was trapped, directly in the path of the colossal robot's advance. Its massive metal foot rose, preparing to crush her and everything else in its way. Izuku's mind went completely silent. The other students, the tests, the points, none of it mattered. All he saw was a kind person who had helped him, now in need of help herself. He heard Saitama's voice, clear as day in his memory. You want to be a hero, right? Go be a hero. He didn't think. He acted. He was 100 meters away. He covered the distance in a single, silent bound, landing softly beside the trapped girl without a sound. Are you okay? He asked. Uraraka looked up, her face streaked with tears of pain and fear. My leg. I'm stuck. Izuku placed a hand on the slab of concrete pinning her. It probably weighed several tons. He lifted it with one hand as if it were a piece of styrofoam and tossed it aside. Can you move? She was too stunned to speak, staring first at her freed leg, then at the massive robot bearing down on them, its shadow completely engulfing them. But that thing. Izuku looked up. The robot's foot, a massive plate of steel capable of crushing a building, was descending. It would hit them in less than 2 seconds. He could easily grab her and leap to safety, but that wasn't what a hero would do. A hero doesn't just save the victim. They stop the threat. For everyone. He looked at his right hand. He could feel the warm, buzzing energy of One for All, the whispers of the 8 vestiges in his mind. He hadn't used it yet. This seemed like a good time to try, not because he needed the power, but because this was what it was for. To be a symbol. To deliver a smash that would inspire hope. But then he remembered Saitama's punch. The simplicity. The absolute, unadorned finality. No light show. No screaming attack name. Just cause and effect. Overwhelming cause. Final effect. He decided to split the difference. He would use the principle of his sensei, but the legacy of his predecessor. He planted his feet, bending his knees slightly. He pulled his right arm back. He didn't channel One for All. He didn't need to. He focused all his attention, all his intent, into this single action. This wasn't a show of power. This was a solution to a problem. He punched upward. There was no sound. For one terrifying, pregnant moment, there was absolute silence. No booming shockwave. No triumphant yell. The world seemed to hold its breath. Izuku's fist connected with the underside of the zero-pointer's massive foot. In the observation room, the faculty watched, their hearts in their throats. They saw the quirkless boy lift the concrete slab. They saw him stand before the robot. They saw him throw a punch. What is he doing? Aizawa yelled, half rising from his seat. That's suicide. All Might gripped the railing, his knuckles white. No, young Midoriya. Don't. Your body can't handle a full power smash yet. He had forgotten, in that moment of panic, that Izuku's body was no longer a normal vessel. Izuku's fist, carrying the conceptual weight of an immovable object, met the unstoppable force of the robot. And the unstoppable force lost. A wave of visible, shimmering energy, the pure kinetic force of the punch, radiated upwards from his fist. It didn't just stop the robot's foot, it traveled through its entire chassis in a nanosecond. The metal groaned, not from being bent or broken, but from being subjected to a force that was fundamentally rewriting its physical structure. Then, the sound came. Not an explosion, but a deep, resonant crunch, like a mountain collapsing into itself. The zero-pointer didn't just break. It didn't fly backwards. It disintegrated. The entire 20-story machine, from its foot to its head, was simultaneously obliterated into a cloud of shrapnel and dust. The punch hadn't just destroyed it, it had erased it from existence, the force of the blow exceeding the molecular cohesion of the metal itself. A rain of screws, wires, and tiny metallic flakes began to fall over the stunned cityscape. Izuku stood there, his fist still raised, his arm perfectly fine. There was no recoil. No shattered bones. No pain. The force he had output was an infinitesimal fraction of what he possessed. It was like a god flicking a pebble. The silence that followed was more profound than any noise. Every single examinee in the city stared at the spot where the Titan had been, their jaws hanging open. They looked at the gentle rain of metallic dust. And they looked at the boy with the patchy green hair, standing calmly in the center of it all, lowering his arm as if he had just completed a particularly satisfying stretch. Ochako Uraraka, sitting on the ground behind him, stared at his back. It was not the back of a boy. It was the back of something else. Something unshakable. Something absolute. She felt a wave of nausea, not from her quirk, but from the sheer vertigo of witnessing what she had just seen. Then she passed out. Time's up. Present Mick's voice shrieked, though it was several octaves higher than usual. In the observation room, no one spoke. The pro-heroes, veterans of countless battles against powerful villains, were frozen. Their minds were struggling to process the raw, physics-breaking power they had just witnessed. Aizawa was gripping his capture weapon, his eyes wide with something he hadn't felt in a very long time, a sense of genuine, professional dread. Midnight had a hand over her mouth, her usual flirty demeanor completely gone. All Might sank into a chair, a mixture of terror and awe washing over him. He had seen what a 100% one-for-all smash could do. This was not that. This was more. It was cleaner, more focused, more absolute. This wasn't the power he had given the boy. This was the boy's own power. A power that dwarfed one for all completely. Nisa was the first to break the silence. He was no longer smiling. He was looking at the screen with an expression of profound, calculating seriousness. Well, the principal said, his voice a low, thoughtful murmur. That's problematic. Izuku, meanwhile, noticed Uraraka had fainted. He gently picked her up, cradling her in his arms. He looked around for Recovery Girl or another faculty member. He had scored 76 villain points from his discreet takedowns. And then there were the rescue points, for saving a fellow examinee and neutralizing the ultimate threat with zero collateral damage. The judges, in their shocked stupor, would later award him the highest rescue points score in the history of UA. He didn't care about any of that. He had seen someone in trouble. He had showed up. And he had solved the problem. He didn't just pass the UA entrance exam. He had presented the entire institution with a new, terrifying, and unsolvable question. He hadn't played their game. He had created his own, a zero-sum game, where he was the only variable that mattered. The acceptance letter from UA arrived in a sleek, unassuming envelope. It contained a small holographic projector that displayed a booming, exuberant All Might declaring Izuku's acceptance. The symbol of peace explained the point system, cheerfully noting that Izuku had scored 76 villain points. Then, his expression grew more serious. But that's not all, young Midoriya, the hologram announced. The practical exam was not just about fighting villains. It was about embodying the spirit of heroism, and for your selfless, decisive actions in the face of overwhelming danger. The screen behind All Might displayed footage of Izuku effortlessly lifting the concrete slab off Uraraka, followed by the silent, terrifying punch that had erased the zero-pointer. The judges have awarded you 60 rescue points. giving you a grand total of 136 points, the highest score in the history of this exam. Inko Midoriya, watching over his shoulder, burst into a fresh torrent of happy, hysterical tears, hugging her son so tightly he feared for her structural integrity. Izuku just watched the hologram, a small, thoughtful frown on his face. He had expected to pass, but the fanfare was unexpected. He hadn't been trying for a high score. He had simply reacted. It seemed that in this world, doing the right thing was not only its own reward but also came with a very generous point system. The first day of school at UA was a sensory overload. The sheer scale of the building, the clamor of hundreds of excited, powerful students, the palpable energy of a place dedicated to creating the future of heroism. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, and yet he felt a strange sense of detachment from it all, like an anthropologist observing a fascinating but foreign culture. He found his classroom, Class 1A. The door was immense, built to accommodate students with gigantification quirks. He slid it open and was met with a scene of controlled chaos. The boy with engines in his legs, Tenya Ida, he would later learn, was standing stiffly, admonishing another student for putting his feet on the desk. That student was, of course, Katsuki Bakugo. Don't you think that's disrespectful to the UA upperclassmen and the craftsmen who made these desks? Ida chopped the air with his hand for emphasis. Bakugo sneered, a look of arrogant boredom on his face. Like I care. What junior high are you from, you stuck-up extra? Izuku quietly made his way to his assigned seat, trying to remain unnoticed. It didn't work. Bakugo's crimson eyes, constantly scanning for threats and annoyances, locked onto him. The sneer on his face froze, replaced by a complex expression of rage, disbelief, and a deep, gnawing confusion. He stomped over to Izuku's desk, slamming his hand down on it. The sound was like a firecracker in the relatively quiet classroom. Everyone stopped to watch. Deku! Bakugo growled, his voice low and dangerous. I don't know what kind of trick you pulled in the entrance exam. I heard the extras talking. That bullshit with the zero-pointer. You've been hiding some flashy quirk all this time, haven't you? Lying to me my whole damn life. Looking down on me, Izuku looked up from his desk. He met Bakugo's furious gaze not with fear or defiance, but with a calm, placid stillness that was more unnerving than any counter-threat. He saw the rage in Bakugo's eyes, but beneath it, he saw something else, a desperate, terrified need for the world to make sense again. His entire identity was built on the foundation of being the strongest, of being superior to the quirkless, useless Deku. That foundation had been shattered, and he was desperately trying to glue the pieces back together with anger. I didn't lie, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice quiet but clear. It carried easily through the silent room. I don't have a quirk, Bakugo's eye twitched. Don't fuck with me. Then how did you do it? How did a worthless piece of shit like you get into UA and wreck that robot? Izuku considered how to answer. The truth was absurd, impossible. I was pulled into another dimension where I trained until my hair started falling out. He settled for a simplified, yet fundamentally honest version. I trained, Izuku said, the two words holding the weight of 18 months of unimaginable hell. That's all. The sheer, unadulterated simplicity of the answer broke something in Bakugo. It was an explanation that offered no footholds for his rage. It wasn't a secret power, it wasn't a trick, it wasn't a lie. It was just effort. It implied that the vast, terrifying chasm that had opened between them wasn't due to some accident of birth, but because Izuku had simply worked harder. It was an idea so offensive to Bakugo's entire being that he couldn't even process it. He opened his mouth to scream, to curse, to blast the calm look off Izuku's face, but he was interrupted. If you're here to make friends, then you can pack up your bags and leave. A tired, monotone voice came from the floor near the doorway. Everyone turned to see a man in a yellow sleeping bag wriggling on the floor like a giant caterpillar. He slurped the last of a juice pouch and unzipped himself, revealing a man with messy black hair, tired eyes, and a capture weapon that looked like a scarf wrapped around his neck. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work, the man said, his gaze sweeping across the room. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. A collective wave of recognition and fear went through the students. Eraserhead. The underground hero who could erase quirks just by looking at someone. Right, Aizawa said, pulling a bundle of gym uniforms from his sleeping bag. Get changed. Meet me on the field. The field was sun-drenched and vast. The students of Class 1A stood in their new blue UA gym uniforms, buzzing with confusion. A quirk apprehension test? Ochako Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed. But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? Here at UA, we're not beholden to such pointless ceremonies, Aizawa stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. You're here to become heroes. You don't have time for that. His tired eyes settled on the class. You've all been taking standardized physical fitness tests since junior high. But you were never allowed to use your quirks. It's not rational. The country still insists on treating us all as equals when we're not. He turned to Bakugo. Bakugo, you got the highest score on the practical exam for villains, right? What was your best softball throw in junior high? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa said, tossing him a softball. Bakugo grinned, a feral, confident expression. He stepped into the circle, wound up, and unleashed the ball with a massive explosion. Die! He screamed, as he always did. The ball rocketed into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke. A few seconds later, Aizawa's phone beeped. He held it up. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited murmurs. Whoa! 700 meters? This is gonna be awesome! We can use our quirks as much as we want. Awesome, you say? Aizawa's voice dropped, and a grim, unnerving smile spread across his face. You think this is a game? Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points for these 8 tests will be judged as having no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the class. Expulsion? On the first day? This wasn't a game, it was a death sentence for their dreams. Izuku alone remained calm. He understood Aizawa's logic. It was a rational deception. A logical ruse, as Ida would later call it, designed to push them to their absolute limits from day one. Still, he would play along. His goal wasn't to rank first. It was simply to get through the day without breaking any of the equipment. Or the planet. The tests began. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against Bakugo. As they took their positions, Bakugo shot him a look of pure venom. Watch this, Deku. This is the power you'll never have. The starting pistol fired. Bakugo propelled himself forward with a series of controlled explosions, a rocket of flesh and fury. He was incredibly fast. He was not fast enough. Izuku simply ran. To him, it was a light jog. To everyone else, he vanished. One moment he was at the starting line, the next he was at the finish line, a small puff of dust settling where he had stopped. The automated system screeched. Time, 0.87 seconds. The students stared, slack-jawed. Bakugo, who finished in a respectable 4.13 seconds, stumbled to a halt, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at Izuku, who was calmly dusting off his uniform, and then at the timer, and back at Izuku. The rage on his face was curdling into something colder, something more like dread. Test 2, grip strength. Izuku picked up the dynamometer. He remembered Saitama's advice from sparring, hold back. No more than that. More. Keep holding back until you're barely touching it. He squeezed. He applied what felt like the pressure of a gentle handshake. The device's digital screen flashed erratically before the entire thing made a sharp cracking sound. The screen went blank. He handed the broken device back to a stone-faced Aizawa. Sorry, he said. Aizawa just grunted, making a note on his clipboard. Subject's raw physical strength exceeds measurement parameters. Possible strength-enhancing quirk with no visible activation signs. Test 3, standing long jump. Izuku took a small hop. He cleared the entire length of the sandpit and landed softly on the grass on the other side. Test 4, repeated side steps. His movements were a blur, so fast the sensors had trouble tracking him. He scored twice as high as the next best student, a boy with purple, sticky balls for hair. With each test, a pattern emerged. Izuku would go, perform an act of casual, physics-defying superhumanity, and the entire class would fall into a stunned silence. The initial excitement of the test had completely evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of awe and fear directed at their quiet, green-haired classmate. He wasn't just good. He wasn't just powerful. He was operating on a completely different level of reality from the rest of them. Finally, they reached the last test, the ball throw. It was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the familiar weight of the softball in his hand. Midoriya! Aizawa's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. Your power is problematic. It's illogical. You've been holding back this entire time, haven't you? Izuku didn't answer. Aizawa's eyes began to glow a faint red, his black hair levitating around his head. His capture weapon writhed like a nest of snakes. I'm watching you. I want to see it. That power you used on the zero-pointer. Whatever your quirk is, use it. Show me what you're capable of when you're not sandbagging. Izuku looked at the ball in his hand. He hadn't used one for All yet. All Might had warned him that even a fraction of it could be devastating. But his body was different now. His control was absolute. A tiny bit. Maybe 1%. Just to satisfy Aizawa. He could channel it into his fingertip, just like he had originally planned to do in his old life, in the timeline where his arm had shattered. He took a deep breath, focusing his will. He felt the warm, buzzing energy of OFA gather from the core of his being, a confluence of 9 generations of power. He guided it, a tiny thread-like stream, down his arm, past his elbow, through his wrist, and into the tip of his index finger. The green, ethereal lightning he had seen in the alley crackled around his arm for a brilliant, silent instant. The vestiges in his mind, who had been observing the day's events with a sort of detached wonder, suddenly surged forward in a unified chorus of alarm. 9th. Wait! Nana Shimura's voice screamed in his consciousness. Your base output is already beyond measure. Adding our power, even a fraction, will cause an exponential cascade. The feedback loop. It was too late. He threw the ball. He had intended to use only his finger, but at the last second, he put a little bit of his Saitama trained arm strength into it as well. It was the equivalent of a normal person trying to throw a ball gently and accidentally using their full strength. Except his full strength was a fundamentally limitless concept. The result was not an explosion of wind. It was a severance. The ball shot forward, and for a split second, everything seemed normal. Then, the air itself seemed to tear apart. A perfect, silent vacuum formed in the ball's wake. A sonic boom erupted that wasn't a boom, but a sharp, clean crack that sounded like the sky itself had just split in two. The ball didn't fly in an arc. It flew in a perfectly straight line, vanishing from sight in less than a microsecond. Every student was thrown off their feet by the sudden, violent displacement of air. Aizawa, his quirk active and his eyes wide, was forced to dig his heels into the ground to keep from being blown away. Silence descended once more, broken only by the beeping of Aizawa's phone. He looked down at the screen, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The screen displayed a single, elegant symbol, infinity. Infinity. The ball had not just been thrown with great force. It had been thrown with enough force to achieve escape velocity and leave Earth's atmosphere. It had been thrown so hard that the UA tracking system, which could follow objects into high orbit, had simply lost it. It was gone. Sensei, Izuku said, looking at his index finger, which was faintly glowing and completely unharmed. You said to use my power? Was that enough? Aizawa stared at him. He was erasing the boy's quirk. He had been since before the throw. His eyes were dry, burning, but he hadn't blinked. And yet the boy had just produced that. He slowly lowered his gaze to his clipboard. Whatever Midoriya's power was, it had no quirk factor. It was not something he could erase. It was as innate to him as his own heartbeat. This wasn't a student with a powerful quirk. This was something else. An anomaly. A walking contradiction to everything he knew about the world, and he was terrifying. But as he looked at Izuku's face, he didn't see arrogance or malice. He saw a genuine, polite curiosity. He saw an unwavering, heroic calm. It was the most frightening and reassuring thing he had ever seen. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control. Right. That's the last test. He showed the class the final scoreboard. Izuku Midoriya was in first place, his score so far above everyone else's it was almost comical. Last place was the short boy with the purple balls on his head, Minoru Mineta, who was now openly weeping. And I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said, his voice flat. It was a logical ruse to make you push yourselves, while most of the class erupted in relieved case. And a girl with a black ponytail, Momo Yayorozu, calmly explained how she knew it was a lie. Bakugo didn't move. He just stood there, his body trembling, his knuckles white. He was staring at Izuku, not with rage, but with a horrifying, vacant expression. The 705-meter throw that had been his moment of triumph, his declaration of dominance, had been rendered utterly, absolutely meaningless. It was like a child proudly showing off a sandcastle to a god who could raise continents. His entire life had been a climb, a brutal, relentless ascent to the top. He had clawed his way up, believing he was the pinnacle of their generation. And now, on the very first day at the peak of the mountain, he had looked up to see Deku already standing on the moon, looking down at him with a placid, unconcerned expression. This was no longer a rivalry. A rivalry requires the participants to be on the same playing field, to be running the same race. This was something else. This was an extinction-level event for his ego. He finally broke. A guttural, animalistic roar tore from his throat. His body language wasn't his usual arrogant swagger. It was a desperate, panicked lunge. Explosions erupted from his palms, propelling him across the field at Izuku like a missile. "Tell me how, Deku!" he screamed, his face a twisted mask of desperation. "Tell me the truth or I'll fucking kill you!" His attack was fast, powerful, and utterly pointless. Izuku didn't even turn his whole body. He simply sidestepped. It was a small, economical movement, but his timing was so perfect that Bakugo, propelled by his own explosions, flew right past him. The air where Izuku's head had been a moment before crackled with heat and ozone. Before Bakugo could reorient himself, before Aizawa could even finish shouting his name, Izuku's hand moved. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a chop. It was a gentle, almost lazy flick of his index and middle fingers against the back of Bakugo's neck, at the point where the skull meets the spine. Tap. The effect was instantaneous. Bakugo's eyes rolled back in his head, his body went completely limp, and he crumpled to the ground in an unconscious heap. It was done with the surgical precision of a master acupuncturist, a non-lethal takedown that was over before it even began. Aizawa, who had been about to restrain Bakugo with his capture weapon, froze mid-motion, his scarf falling limp. He had just witnessed his most volatile student, a boy with the power of a walking hand grenade, be neutralized in under a second with a flick of a finger. The entire class stared in horrified silence at Bakugo's unconscious form, and then at Izuku, who was looking down at his handiwork with a thoughtful expression, as if analyzing the results of an experiment. "His technique is powerful, but he's too reliant on his right hook," Izuku muttered to himself, his old analytical habits kicking in. "And he leads with his rage. It makes him predictable. He needs to incorporate more feints, and work on his footwork if he wants to." Oh, he looked up and saw 20 pairs of terrified eyes staring at him. He realized he had been muttering his analysis aloud. "Sorry," he said quietly. He was losing control. It seemed like the most rational way to de-escalate the situation. He used Aizawa's own favorite word against him. The logic was inescapable. The execution was terrifying. Shota Aizawa looked from the unconscious Bakugo to the utterly calm Midoriya. He saw no malice, no pride, just a simple statement of fact. He saw terrifying potential, but it was wrapped in an unwavering heroic disposition. This boy wasn't a puzzle to be solved. He was an anomaly to be understood, and Aizawa had the distinct, sinking feeling that the fate of the world might one day rest on keeping this calm, quiet, ridiculously overpowered boy on their side.